We have learned how to solve one-step equations, two-step equations, and now we're going to learn how to solve equations that have variables on both sides of the equal sign. So before we do that, let's go ahead and write down the algorithm. I think that will be easier than trying to just jump right into it. So our first step in the algorithm is look for the smallest variable and undo that. So I'm going to go ahead and pause it and write that down, and you can write it down as well. Sometimes when we look for the smallest variable, however, that makes our variable on the right-hand side of the equal sign, and some people don't like to do that. So the other thing that you can do is undo variable from the right-hand side of the equal sign, so you're moving everything from the right-hand side to the left-hand side. So I'm going to go ahead and write that down, and I'm going to write or, and then this is step 1, so this will make sense when we look at some examples. So you can choose which step 1 that you want to do. So I'm going to go ahead and write down the second step 1, and then you can write it as well. So there is step number 1, if you prefer to do it that way. Undo the variable on the right-hand side of the equal sign, and then do the same thing to the left-hand side. And I'm going to put a little caution. If you do it this way, it may cause you to have a negative variable, which bothers some people. So it's up to you, and when we look at some examples, this will make sense. Then this step 2 is solve using the one-step or two-step algorithm. And you should be familiar with that. We've done several practices involving that, so you should be familiar with how to do that. And if you're not, you can go back and look in your notes. All right, so that step 2 really has a lot more steps, but you should be familiar with how to solve a one-step equation or a two-step equation. All right, so let's look at our first example. Our first example says use the algebraic process to solve the equation. We have 3x plus 3 equals 2x plus 8. I've rewritten the equation so I have room to work. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to separate my brothers from my sisters. And then as you see, this looks a little bit different than what we're used to seeing because I have an x on my brother's side and I have an x on my sister's side. Remember, the object of algebra is to get the x's by itself and to see what x needs to be to make everything balanced and equal. So I'm going to remove the x's from my sister's side, and that's a plus 2x or a positive 2x. To undo a positive, I'm going to use a negative or subtract. What I do to my sisters, I also have to do to my brothers. 2x minus 2x goes away, and over here I'm left with 3x minus 2x is 1x plus 3 equals 8. So I'm not done yet because I do not have x by itself. So to get x by itself, I have to undo plus 3. I'm going to undo plus 3 by subtracting 3. That goes away, and I'm left with 1x or x. 8 minus 3 equals 5. Okay, so the idea is exactly the same as everything that we have been doing. It's just now, instead of just having one variable, we have variables on both sides of the equal sign that we need to get rid of or move. I guess another way to think about it is moving it. All right, let's look at our example 2, and I'm going to rewrite it so I have room to work. So we have 6x minus 6 equals 3x minus 3. So again, I have an x on both sides of the equal sign. I need the x's on one side. So my first step is to undo this positive 3x with a negative 3x. If I do that to my sisters, I have to do that to my brothers. 3x minus 3x goes away. I'm left with 6x minus 3x. So I'm left with 3x minus 6 equals negative 3. Then I have to get the x by itself. So to do that, I undo minus 6 with plus 6. Three x equals negative 3 plus 3 is positive 3. And then I'm going to divide both sides by 3 so I can get x by itself. X equals 1. Example 3, I'm going to work two different ways so we can kind of look at that algorithm. The algorithm says look for the smallest variable and undo it. So when I separate my brothers and my sisters, this, I'm going to write it because it's not written in black, but this x is the same thing as 1x. This is my smallest variable, so I'm going to subtract that from my brothers, which means I have to do that from my sisters. Goes away from here, and I'm left with 7. 5x minus 1x is 4x minus 1. Then I have to add 1 here and add 1 here. I'm left with 4x equals 8. And then I have to undo that. So x equals 2. Alright, so I subtracted the smallest number, the minus 1x up here at the top, and that left me with positive variable, positive 4x all the way down. And some people prefer to have a positive variable, and some people prefer to have their variable on the right hand side. I don't care how you do it. Let's look at it the other way. So I'm going to have x plus 7 equals 5x minus 1. So I'm going to subtract 5x from both sides. This goes away, and I'm left with negative 1 here. X minus 5x is negative 4x plus 7. And I forgot to change colors. I'll change colors. So negative 4x plus 7, I need to undo that plus 7 with a minus 7. So I'm going to do that to both sides. I'm left with negative 4x. Negative 1 minus 7 is negative 8. And then I'm going to divide both sides by negative 4. Negative 4 divided by negative 4 is a positive 1. So I have 1x, or just x. Negative 8 divided by negative 4 is a positive 2. So I get the same answer no matter which way I work it. You have to decide if you prefer to have positive variables or if you want your variables on the left hand side and then kind of deal with negatives. I don't care how you do it. It's kind of a personal choice. So you kind of have to work some problems and see which works best for you. So just remember, if you choose to have your variables on the left hand side, then just, you got to really watch your signs. Let's look at our next example. I have 4x plus 6 equals 3x plus 9. So my first step is I have to get the variables on one side of the equation. So I'm going to start with that 3x, and I'm going to undo that. So I have a positive 3x. To undo that, it's a negative 3x. So I'm going to do that on both sides. 4x minus 3x is 1x, or just x. So I have x plus 6 equals 9. Then to get the x by itself, I have to undo that plus 6 with a minus 6. What I do to the left-hand side, I do the right-hand side. I'm left with x equals 3. Okay, let's look at example 5. All right, so I have 3z over 4 equals z over 4 plus 12. Let's separate my brothers and my sisters. So this is like having 1z over 4. So in order to undo that, I'm going to subtract 1z over 4. The top is positive, so to undo that, it's a negative. And then I'm going to subtract 1z over 4 here. This goes away, and I'm left with 12. 3 minus 1 is 2. So I have 2z over 4 equals 12. Then to undo that, I have a number and a variable stuck together, so that means I'm multiplying. To undo multiplication, I divide. If I divide that by 2 over 4, I'm going to divide this by 2 over 4. So I can use a calculator, but when I work through the math, z equals 24. So it's kind of hard with fractions, but remember we can use a calculator. It is no different than anything that we've been doing. It just seems complicated because of the fractions. At the bottom, you have 2 problems on your own. So it says use algebra or model to solve the equations. Go ahead and pause the video and work through those, and then you can come back and check your answers. Okay, I'm going to work through these. I have used a calculator, so you were not able to see me use a calculator, but that's how I did this to make the math a little bit easier. On this one, it depends really on my mood, I guess. I usually like positive variables, and it does not bother me to have the variable on the right hand side of the equation. So I'm going to go ahead, and that makes this easier because there's only one thing on the right, on the sister side. So I'm going to subtract 24m from both sides of the equation. This goes away, and on my brother's side I have 64. 40 minus 24m is 16m. Then I'm going to divide both sides by 16 because I have to undo that multiplication. I undo multiplication with division. I'm left with m equals 64 divided by 16 is 4. So if you kind of moved everything around the equal sign, that's fine. As long as you got m equals 4, that is the correct answer. Okay, then let's look at the next problem. It's kind of a long one. I have 1.4g plus 2.4 equals 0.8g plus 8.1. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to undo this 0.8g. So it's positive. To undo that, I'm going to subtract. Have to subtract from both sides. This goes away, and I'm left with 8.1 over here. Then 1.4 minus 0.8 is 0.6. And then I'm still left with that 2.4. Okay, then I have to undo this 0.24. And to undo addition, I subtract. So I'm going to subtract 2.4. Subtract 2.4. I am left with 0.6g equals 5.7. Then I have to undo multiplication with division. So I'm going to divide on both sides. So I am left with g equals 5.7 divided by 0.6. Again, I used a calculator. And g equals 9.5. If there is anything that you don't understand on today's lesson, please come see me in the morning.